This week on Behind the Pulpit, buckle up and get ready for what could be our most action-packed episode ever.
Andy Stanley recently hosted a conference at his church called the Unconditional Conference that has caused a bit of a firestorm online.
So everybody has to, in a sense, take a stand and draw a line somewhere.
Yeah.
But it seems like maybe Andy is compromising on some of the biblical ethics.
Israel's getting ready to invade Gaza, although there has been some pretty clear disturbing images that have been coming out.
We answer one of your questions, as well as revisiting an old one that opens up a conversation on the end times.
You might think this is the only view. What I just described there, you might be like, yeah, that's the truth about what's going to happen at the end.
As always, make sure you stay tuned for today's Theology Sprint, and wherever you may be watching or listening to this, we hope you're having a wonderful day. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's edition of Behind the Pulpit.
Hey out there in YouTube land, welcome to Behind the Pulpit for October the 16th, 2023. My name is Bob Erbig. I'm one of the pastors here at Millington Baptist Church, and I'm joined here by my colleague,
Dave Henschel. I'm thankful you also let me serve as one of the pastors here.
You're welcome. Not that I have much of a say over that, but I'm so glad you're here today, and we're going to be bantering back and forth about a lot of topics. Dave,
a lot of bantering.
Fall is in the air, and I've been watching recently about a lot of maps that are telling me where the peak foliage is. Have you taken a peek at those? Yeah, apparently up in Upper New York State, it's peak foliage time right now. In fact, there's some places that have gone past peak foliage.
I feel like we need to get you some more work to do if you have time for this. Like, you got time to be Googling foliage maps? Like, I'm busy.
They just pop up on my news feed sometimes and let me know when it's time to catch the foliage. It's creeping our way. Our peak foliage is coming up.
I'm kidding around. There's a lot of good oranges this year, reds this year. It's been quite pretty. And I like the crisp in the air. I got my jacket on today.
You do? Yeah, it was a little chilly this morning.
It was like 40s. It was definitely
I love
cold.
the 40s.
Yeah.
Put on the jacket, you feel like you're good. You know, by the way, on my
Check the NFL scores.
On my property, we have a couple walnut trees. Do you have any walnut trees on your property?
No.
Yeah,
thankful.
they're dangerous, man.
Yeah.
Dude, they cracked a window on one of our cars. It was pretty crazy. And I'm afraid, like, that it's going to fall on my head sometime and knock some sense into me or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a photon torpedo coming down from that tree.
I guess you got to wear a helmet when you go to your car.
You do.
Yeah.
You do. And they're tall. They're hard to take down. They're like, it's like, Jack and the Beanstalk at my backyard.
And it's not like the walnut, right? There's like a casing on the outside of it, right?
It's not. Yeah. If you
like
want to get to the walnut, you got to crack the outer nut.
There's one by the
say that 5 times
where
fast.
I park my car in the church lot by the dumpster over there, and it always drops the nuts right there. And I'm like, I drive onto the spot and like crunch, 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 crunch.
It's crazy. Just be careful with your windshields, man. It might take you out. Then you'd be driving home with no windshield.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the warning, Pastor
They're
Bob.
pretty dangerous. It's some spiritual warfare out there with the walnut trees. All right. Hey, well, we're glad that you're joining us today. We got a couple announcements. Just want to let you know about what's coming up in the life of your church body. And while Dave recomposes himself over there, let me let you know about the first couple things. So what's up on the agenda? Trunk or treat. What more can I say about this? It's this weekend. Go sign up and be there. Be there from 1 to 3. It is time. This is the week. All right.
Saturday, 1 o'clock.
Saturday. All right.
Rain or shine.
Just
a little note, rain or shine.
Now we were asking ourselves, are we going to be out there greeting? We still have to pray about that, right? Prayer and parking.
I'll let you know.
Okay.
You know.
Sounds good.
I'll ask you, you ask me, and somebody will greet.
There you go. All right. What's next? What do we got? Membership class. All right.
October 25th, we hope that you'll consider joining as a covenant member of Millington. If you've been attending and you're wondering if you would like to commit as a member of our church, we would recommend that you take this class, and that will give you all the information that you need to know in terms of making a decision of, is this a church that's for me? So mark your calendar, really register online for the class. It's a wonderful opportunity to learn more about our church.
That's great. We'd love to have you out there. All right, what's up next? Stephen Ministry. Dun, dun, dun.
Hey, this is a great ministry of Millington. It's an extension of pastoral care. We are having a new training starting in January. It's a big commitment, 50 hours, 20 weeks, 2 years. However, if you'd like a taste, just a taste of that,
A little,
just like,
a little nibble of
like
what it
an
could be.
appetizer. Like, when you go to Costco.
An hors d'oeuvre.
And they have the little.
A pig in a blanket, if you will.
Yeah, try one. So we have 4 weeks in November where we're going to just teach a class called Christian Caregiving as a Way of Life. And we'd love to have you join us. It's going to be in the Great Room starting the first Sunday of November at 9 o'clock. So Stephen Ministry class is going to be great.
Be on the lookout for details about that. And then last but certainly not least, coming up on November the 4th, we are having our next Underground Sessions event covering the topic of artificial intelligence. We've been announcing this, and we're going to keep announcing it. So you probably will be getting tired of me mentioning this. But we have a great panel. We're going to cover dangers, benefits, lots of kind of metaphysical questions, but also how that impacts daily life, which is something I think a lot of us haven't thought about until now. So we hope that you come out. It's going to be live in the Youth and Family Ministry building. There's going to be some interactive components to that. We're also going to have some food, and it's going to be great. If you can't make it, we are going to be recording it, and then we'll release the recording shortly after the event. But we would love to have you there in person for that. And then
Action step, register right now.
That's right. Thank you for
Register
the reminder.
Underground right now. We'd
If
love
you,
to know
if
that you're
you
coming.
want to have the food that we think is going to be great at the event, you need to go register so you're not caught short, or you don't make other people angry because you didn't register and they didn't get to eat enough food. So there you go.
It's going to be great.
Coming up,
Or have your AI bot register for you.
there you go. Maybe some of you might have a Google Assistant that can do that for you right now. So the Underground is something we do a couple times a year. We're going to be having another one in March. We'll be promoting that at the actual event. That's going to cover another topic, sexuality and gender, transgender. That's a whole other conversation in the culture. And we're going to be having a guy named Christopher Yuan coming to speak about that. That's going to be March the 24th. He's actually going to do a testimony in the Sunday morning service, and then that's going to be a Sunday evening event that we have. So mark your calendars for that. It's going to be an exciting 6 months when it comes to the Underground Sessions.
Can't wait to see Christopher Uwan in person.
He is going to be here. And he was a college professor for Rachel, so she was super excited when we booked him.
It's going to be great. We got a great lineup. It's an exciting time to be part of Millington Baptist Church.
Boom. There you go. Speaking of what's going on in the world, let's transition to our In the News segment. Alrighty, well, there's a lot of things that are going on in the news, so many things to pick and choose from, but there's one thing that's been kind of making waves in the evangelical world. Some of you may be aware that Andy Stanley recently hosted a conference at his church called the Unconditional Conference that has caused a bit of a firestorm online. That was related to the LGBT conversation and or LGBTQ plus conversation, and parents with kids who fall on that spectrum. And there's been a lot of discussion about that, Dave.
So I mean, I have followed and enjoyed the ministry of Andy Stanley for 20 years. In fact, he's got some writings on the book of Nehemiah that have been particularly helpful to me in that area.
Visioneering.
He's also a Dallas Seminary grad, so he was a frequent guest speaker as part of the alumni faculty. Andy Stanley's a great speaker, an amazing preacher, just so gifted. His book on communication for a change is just great. So lots of respect for him. But to be honest with you, I've been really concerned about this most recent decision. If you're following the news in evangelical world, you know about like 4 or 5 weeks ago, Al Mohler, the president of Southern Seminary, wrote an article called "The Train is About to Leave the Station." And it's a heck of a headline. I think it was World Magazine.
I guess. And then he followed up with "The Train Left the Station." Right?
Did he?
Or something like that.
So that was just looking at the speaker lineup that he had for this conference, and they were all coming from what we call an affirming perspective, which is the perspective that if someone has an LGBT identity, the wisdom there for friends, parents, family is to affirm that identity in their lives. And that's the perspective of relational strength and trying to maintain communication with them. But all of the speakers came from that perspective. There were no speakers that came from a different perspective. And so that was concerning to Al Mohler. He wrote that article. They had the conference. It was mostly billed as a help to parents shepherding their children who are maybe identifying like this. Then that Sunday after the conference, Andy Stanley preaches a message and does not record it, does not live stream, and they always are right on top of live stream video.
Yep.
Podcast is there 30 minutes after church. It was like radio silence. He went dark. And somebody in the audience took their phone or something and like recorded the audio of his sermon and then posted that sort of rogue to YouTube. So that got listened to, and then that got circulated in a viral way. And then a lot of people started realizing what they had done that weekend with the conference, and became kind of all the talk about, is this okay, what he did? And do you have some thoughts on this whole scandal and how Andy came down, and how maybe we might come from a little bit of a different perspective than him?
Yeah, I think the thing that's interesting about it is he seemed to almost, to some level, not wanting the perspective, or maybe he was concerned that he was not going to be perceived a certain way. I mean, there's been a few different views on why he wasn't kind of coming out and saying, this is what I think. And I think even in the sermon there was a bit of like, we think this, but we do this, type of thing. We believe biblical marriage is between a man and a woman, but it's unsustainable for other people to hold to that, basically, if you come from a different perspective.
So what he was saying in the sermon is this kind of catch, and Andy's so good at communication. He said, some people draw lines, we draw circles. So people like Al Mohler draw lines, and those are divisive inherently. We don't do that. We draw circles. Jesus drew circles. We at our church want to draw circles. And so that perspective seemed like a little bit confusing. Like, do you have any lines? And does a circle have lines? It kind of does, right? Is anybody outside of the
somebody
circle
outside the circle
that you drew? And I was kind of drawing this on my whiteboard with you, and I said, Bob, who's on the outside of the circle? And you go, well, Al Mohler's on the outside of the circle. Do you remember when you said that?
Yeah.
And so everybody has to, in a sense, take a stand and draw a line somewhere. Yeah. But it seems like maybe Andy is compromising on some of the biblical ethics in this.
Well, I think there was a statement to say that Jesus doesn't draw lines, he draws circles. And the critique has been, well, that's actually not true. Jesus drew both, right? Like, there was a line that Jesus drew in the sand on some things and circles on other things. And this is probably a good example of where, pastorally, you want to be caring for somebody who's wrestling and struggling with something, and you want them to feel accepted as somebody who's made in the image of God. But then how do you also be biblically faithful to things that we would argue is pretty clearly taught in Scripture, and what are the issues that are related to that? So one of the other things you didn't mention is, I think there was recently another article that noted that there was another closed door session that he had where he was kind of critical of people like Christopher Yuan, who we have, like I just mentioned, is coming in March. Who is somebody who wrestles with same-sex attraction, but wrote a book called Holy Sexuality, which basically said that God cares more about our holiness than anything else. So how do we ultimately come under Christ's lordship in all areas of our life, including our sexuality, which seemed to be a bit of a different tack than what Andy, or at least the conference, was saying. I'm not sure. Yeah, Andy's not here to defend himself, so.
He's not, and perhaps we should make that caveat. But what he said was that people like Christopher Yuan or Rosaria Butterfield or Sam Albury, who was very critical of the conference as well in a public way, by the way.
And all of those people had, at some level, lived in or been part. Beckett Cook, too, is another one who's been a big voice, who wrestled with, or still wrestle with, same-sex attraction.
You're right.
Were critical. And they weren't invited to speak at the conference.
They were not. Right. Or that perspective was not represented.
Right.
And so what he said was those people don't have anything to offer parents of LGBT youth, and that's why they weren't represented, which I thought was unfair and a little bit dismissive. I was watching a podcast by Sean McDowell, who was sort of commenting on this conference, and the way that they packaged it together on that particular podcast was helpful to me. He said either Andy Stanley is one of two things. Either he's naive or he's crafty. Either he's naive in the sense that he doesn't realize that this conference and platforming speakers with this affirming position is going to send a confusing message, and he doesn't realize that. Yeah. Or he's crafty and he wants to take his church in a certain direction, but he's moving very slowly because he knows that this is going to be a hard sell towards evangelicals. And what I would say is if I wanted to move my church in this direction of affirmation, I'd build a conference like this. And
Yeah,
this
and
is the way I would
that's
do
been the
it.
critique too.
That's been
so.
the critique. Like, are you trying to move your church this way? If so, why don't you just tell us instead of sort of being disingenuous about it? That's
Right.
not to say we shouldn't definitely seek to understand, listen to stories, approach this position from the perspective of compassion and love. We want to do that. But how do we do that in such a way that does not compromise our commitment to the Scriptures?
Right, and the conversation that's been going on, if you were to Google and you were to term this, there's people use the term side A and side B, which I forget which side is which, but I think
so side A is somebody who has LGBT identity and is willing to live that out in a very proud way in their lives. This is June is their month. That's side A.
And then side B would be
so if you're a Christian, you can be a gay Christian. That's side A. So you can openly affirm that. Side B, you want to take that one?
Side B would be somebody like a Christopher Yuan, who would basically say, "I wrestle with this."
No. Well, he would critique side B. So side B is someone who would say, I have same-sex desires. They're not going to go away. I'm choosing to live as a Christian, but I still identify as a gay person. But I'm not going to be acting out on those desires.
Okay.
But my identity still is with this community, and I'm still seeing this in my life as a sacrifice and that kind of thing. So Christopher Yuan is going to come alongside of that discussion with a third way and say,
Gotcha.
No, it's problematic to still ground your identity inside of something like your sexual desires. That's not the fundamental part of you.
That's not the most important part of who you are.
Right.
Yeah.
So he would be critical of the side B movement.
As well as the side A movement.
As well as the side A movement. Yes. So he's coming from a totally different perspective. We're looking forward to hearing from him in March.
Yeah.
So that's coming up.
I think the thing that's important about this, too, is that ultimately this is a question about biblical authority and what you think and how you interpret Scripture and what places it have in your life.
It is.
And that's why it's been a big conversation now within evangelicalism about how do we deal with people that are wrestling, and how do we also be biblically faithful?
Right.
Yep.
Right. So that is a big thing in the news.
Yep.
So
that's in the news.
We'll have to talk more about it. Ask us questions offline.
Yeah. The other big thing that's been in the news, obviously, we talked about last week, is the war in Israel. There's not been super major developments in the last week. Israel's getting ready to invade Gaza, although there has been some pretty clear disturbing images that have been coming out of that the fact that the whole attack was specifically focused on children and women, which is really, really disturbing. And then there's been a whole lot of responses of people that have been supportive of almost Hamas and what they did, which is equally disturbing. Mm-hmm. So lots of really disturbing things that are happening, and then people talking about, is this going to develop into a large global war? Which I don't know. There might be some people that get involved here. We're going to have to wait and see,
right?
And certainly pray about it.
So two parts to this in terms of like looking at this through the lens of a Christian worldview. The first one is when you see brutality and not just tragedy, but atrocity. I think there's a difference. When you see this kind of immoral, unethical, egregious behavior against the most weak and vulnerable amongst us, the Scripture is clear about that. Jesus said, if you cause any one of these little ones to stumble, you might as well tie a millstone around your neck and be thrown into the sea. He's constantly telling us to protect and to serve and to give our lives for those who are weak and vulnerable, not abuse and oppress and take advantage. So we ought to be able to condemn the massacre and the behavior of the terrorist group Hamas, period, full stop. There's no reason why we as a Christian should not do that. The second question is a little bit more nuanced, because a lot of people are asking, okay, so how does this relate specifically to the Bible? And is this a fulfillment of some sort of predictive prophecy that we have about the nation of Israel?
Right.
And how should Christians relate, not so much to the Jewish people who are being oppressed, but how should we relate to this from the standpoint of the nation of Israel and the promises of God in Scripture? That's kind of a different question.
It is.
And
And maybe a third question also has been about the whole idea of just war. Does Israel have the righteous and almost responsibility to respond to this attack that came upon them? Mm-hmm. So that's another discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we thought we would do is bring back a question from last week's Behind the Table podcast that had to do
Behind
with,
the pulpit, man.
I'm sorry, Behind the Pulpit.
I know we're behind the table, but
Yeah,
we're behind the
my
pulpit
fault.
too.
Yeah, where are we again? So Behind the Pulpit, and it had to do with eschatology. So can you just remind us, Tim, what was that question that we got last week, and we wanted to do a little bit of a deeper dive this week?
Yeah, shout out to my brother Ben, who actually asked this question.
Oh, Ben.
Hope you're listening.
His name wasn't on there. Hopefully he was okay with you outing him.
I think he'll be all right with it. The question is, that's the wrong slide. But go to this event, guys. The question
There it is.
What do you believe in regards to pre, mid, or post-tribulation rapture? This is something that he was thinking about when this was all starting up, and he wanted to ask you guys this question.
Yeah,
Right.
and last week we took it as a theology sprint, so we weren't able to cover that in depth. We thought we'd come back and maybe give a fuller explanation because we didn't walk through what each of those views are. There's actually a fourth position called the pre-wrath position, and then there's different elements of this.
So let's give like an overview, and maybe we can take turns here, Bob, of the different eschatological positions. So the first one is called dispensational premillennialism. This is the belief that Jesus will come back after the 7-year tribulation, and he'll rule for 1,000 years. Some dispensational premillennialists are pre-trib, meaning before the 7 years. Some are mid-trib, meaning the rapture will happen in the middle of the tribulation. So dispensational premillennialism popularized itself in the late 1800s. John Nelson Darby, Schofield, Chafer, Moody Bible Institute, Biola, Philadelphia College of Bible, all of these schools, in addition to Bible prophecy conferences, became really popular in the early 1900s. It's known for taking the Bible in a very literal fashion. And so if something is predicted, then we're going to wait for the literal fulfillment of that. And so this is how they understand how the future is going to unfold. There's going to be this 7-year tribulation period. There's going to be an antichrist. God's going to be drawing people to himself during that time of difficulty, but it's going to be a brutal time of persecution at the end of this age. And then God will literally fulfill his promises to the people of Israel that they say are yet unfulfilled, such as the land promises to Abraham in Genesis chapter 15, such as the promises of the temple, those kinds of things. And so dispensational premillennialism is a very popular view because of a couple different really widespread books, like the late Great Planet Earth by Hal
Or the
Lindsey,
Left Behind series.
or the Left Behind series. And so you've probably familiarized yourself with this view. And let me just say, you might think this is the only view. What I just described there, you might be like, yeah, that's the truth about what's going to happen at the end, because it's really popular, especially in America, because of those schools, because of a lot of churches, Bible churches, Baptist churches that taught this, because of those popular books and movies and films. That's not the only view. That's one way to understand how things will unfold.
Yeah, and we were talking about this before. I think one of the reasons that dispensationalism was really popular, especially in the 19th century, was concurrently with that, there was a big move to liberalism in a lot of mainline churches that would have been more on the Reformed side and lots of other things. And so dispensationalists really stood up as being people that had a high view of the Bible at a time where there was a lot of theological drift. And then, the 50s, 60s, 70s, this view was really, really popular.
All right. Would you mind if I give you the second view, which is historic premillennialism? Can you go to the next slide? After
Sure.
This
Not to be confused with dispensational premillennialism. There's some overlap and some differences. One of the things I would say is that a lot of the pieces of the end times, so things like the Antichrist and things like that, or when things are going to happen, like a lot of people agree on the things that are going to be the case. We just disagree on the timing and what it's going to look like and all of that. But there's a lot of elements that all the views have an agreement about. So historic premillennialism is less known. It's also called classical premillennialism. You can put the slide back up there, Tim. And this is and premillennialism is really based on Revelation 20, and all of them are based on the debate about what do you believe about the millennium found in Revelation 20? Is it going to be a literal 1,000 years, or is it a symbolic 1,000. Is it a symbolic time, which we'll get to in the next two views. But historic premillennialism basically holds to the fact that we're in the church age. There will be a great tribulation. It may or may not be 7 years. That's unclear. There will be an intensifying period of tribulation at the end of the church age before the millennium, and then at the end of that tribulation, Jesus will come back. Now, a distinguishing feature from historic premillennialism, a couple of things that are maybe different than dispensationalism, is that the rapture, when Christ's followers are caught up in the air, occurs at the same time as the second coming, and that's based on a specific reading of 1 Thessalonians 4. The idea of being caught up in the air is that believers rise, they're caught up, they meet Jesus at his second coming, and then they immediately come back down. So
okay, you know what? I forgot to mention the rapture. Can you go back to dispensational premillennialism for a second?
So that's actually what the question.
Yeah.
Well, I thought we were going to come back and debate that. Should I not get into it then?
No, you should get into it. But just go back to the dispensational one for a second. Notice here that the rapture is not the same event as the second coming in the dispensational view. So they would say a rapture is a movement from earth to heaven. The second coming is a movement from heaven to earth. Those two things are separated either by 3.5 years or by 7 years, and they would see the descriptions of the events in the Scripture as different. Okay, with that said,
but some of that's also maybe a looking at the same passages but reading them differently. So
Totally.
like Revelation 3 and the shielding and So
okay, so a historic premillennialist, how would you understand how they work together? Can you go over that again? So they're the same event, and how do they work together?
It's the same event. So it occurs after the tribulation. We're caught up. We meet Christ in the air, and then we immediately come back down, and then kind of that's it. We have the Battle of Armageddon. Everything happens, and then we go into the new heavens and the new earth. So there's not this bifurcation of the 7 years.
Right. And this was a very popular view in the early church.
It was, yeah. I think even attributed to Augustine and a few other ones.
I think Augustine's Amil, but
I think
Justin Martyr,
right.
Some of the early church fathers. This is the kind of view you would find in the earliest Christian writings. It
is a very early
Irenaeus.
view, right?
Yeah.
Of people that were closest to the events that were happening back then.
Yeah.
So that's one distinguishing feature of it.
Is that mainly the Denver Seminary view that was taught? Would you say that was the primary view there?
Well, when I was there, that is typically the Denver
Seminary
Seminary view. Yeah,
okay.
most scholars there would hold to that. So like Craig
today,
Blomberg. Yeah.
Blomberg.
So people that hold to that, like Craig Blomberg, he would be a historic premill.
So you wouldn't look Craig Blomberg in the face and say, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about, would you?
I wouldn't, and a lot of the guys even at Southern Seminary, like an Al Mohler, a Tom Schreiner,
come on,
dare I say it, Russell Moore. I mean, a lot of those people hold to even D.A. Carson, all historic premill folks.
Right. So these are not slouches who don't read their Bibles.
No, not at all.
So that's historic premill. Now let's go to the next one.
What can I mention the other distinction? Is typically you mentioned the thing about the future of ethnic Israel. A lot of times this view is often very Christological and focused, that the promises are fulfilled in Christ, leading to that. And so some people on here, there's some play. Some people would be more, if you're more leaning to like an amillennial side, would see the church as replacing Israel. But there's also people that don't think that there's a distinguishment between the church and Israel. So there's some different views on that piece of it.
Yeah, I mean, you can be historic premill or amil and say that the church has essentially replaced Israel as a nation, as the people of God that God's going to be working through. They're not God's chosen people anymore. Israel is not God's chosen people. God's working through the church. You can believe that, and also believe there's a future for ethnic Jews, and there'll be this mass conversion of Jews at the end of this age, and they will become part of the church.
Yes,
which is the new Israel.
They will be grafted into the church. Yeah,
right. Yeah. So that's.
But the two in terms of some of the land stuff is more of a dispensational view.
It is.
Yeah.
The land, the throne, the promises that are very specifically given in terms of the borders and the covenant of David. Those are very important things in terms of the dispensational perspective. All right, number 3 is amillennialism. So this is the simplest view. This is the view that the millennium is a spiritual reign of Jesus right now today in the hearts of Christ followers. And that's happening simultaneously as the persecutions of Christians are occurring. and the millennium and the tribulation are on parallel tracks. That right now we are in this age that is, on the one hand, the already form of the kingdom is present and Jesus is reigning, and on the other hand, the kingdom is not yet, and we are experiencing tribulation and persecution. And this would be a view that is popular amongst Presbyterians, Reformed churches, like I mentioned, the City of God by Augustine. The whole Catholic Church pretty much takes this viewpoint. It's probably the most popular eschatological view in Christendom.
In terms of church history, it is the most popular view. Yeah.
So Christ will triumph in this age over the enemies of God, but he will do so in a spiritual sense, and it won't be so earthy and literal as some of the premillennial kind of thinking.
Right.
So that's amillennialism.
And then last is postmillennialism, which has some features to amillennialism, but it's different in the sense that postmillennialists typically think things will be getting better. Like, we're in a period of tribulation, but as the church grows and has more influence, the millennium basically is we're in the millennium now before Christ comes back. But this is the hopeful view, to put it that way.
Yeah. So the post there is Jesus is coming after
the millennium.
So this is a very optimistic view. This is a view that says it starts out as a mustard seed and it grows into this big, huge tree. It starts out small, it gets big, and over time, the kingdom of God progresses. It marches on. And that might take some time, but maybe things are looking bleak for you in the next year or 10 years or 20 years, and you're like, what's going on in Israel? A postmillennialist would say, you got to look at the next 500 years. So take the long view. Why don't you have some kids and have some grandkids and teach them the gospel and teach them to serve Christ, and eventually society will get better and better and better and better until we'll enter this reign of 1,000 years of peace, prosperity. The nations will serve Christ, and then when that occurs, then at the end of 1,000 years of peace, Christ will return and set up the new heavens and the new earth.
I would say a couple things about that. Number one, that was actually a pretty popular view during the Great Awakenings in America, because they were seeing major differences happening in the culture because there was a conversion of people coming to Christ. Secondly, nowadays there's been some popular books written. I'm thinking of that, like The Benedict Option by Rod Dreher. I'm not sure if he holds this view, but of others who hold this view, there will be the idea that we need to train up the next generation, Christianize them, and then they will go and impact society, to make more Christian impact in the world, and things will get better.
Yeah. Well, like you said, Jonathan Edwards during the First Great Awakening wrote about this stuff. Today, probably the most popular speaker, preacher, pastor with this view is Doug Wilson.
Doug Wilson.
So he's becoming
a big voice.
He's fast becoming the prominent voice of postmillennialism in our day. Although he has recently influenced people like James White, who's now a postmillennialist as well. So this view is gaining traction. It did kind of fall on hard times, especially during the 19th and 20th century. When we had
the 20th century, World War I,
World War II, things were not looking positive, and we're going, are you sure things are getting better?
Well, you can see why premillennialism was a more popular view there, because it's like all these people are dying, terrible things are happening.
That's when dispensational premillennialism started to catch fire during those very difficult, in terms of the socioeconomic, political situation. Right. That was very attractive. That, well, we can't fix this thing, so Jesus has got to come back, and that's how it's going to get fixed.
Right. Yeah. And it may be worth stating that I think how it ends should matter. It does matter in the sense of how we're going to live now, because how you think things are going to end, like if you think that things are getting worse and whatever versus or things are getting better, that's going to affect how you want to interact with culture and stuff now.
Yeah, most definitely. I think that theology matters.
It does.
And
it matters very much.
That matters for this. That matters for Andy Stanley. That matters in so many different areas. It matters what you believe. It affects how you behave.
Yes.
So
everybody is a theologian.
Yeah. Those are some great thoughts. Hopefully that was a little bit of a deeper dive, which gets us into the next topic. Somebody had asked a question.
You feel like we answered the question about the pre, mid, and post.
Okay, let's just maybe be crystal clear about the trib
so
thing.
the pre-tribulational is Jesus is coming back before this 7-year tribulation, which is solely held by a dispensational premillennialist.
That's correct.
Nobody else holds that view.
Right.
In terms of the millennial
right. So now
schema.
we're having an internal debate inside of dispensationalism.
Right.
And the other three views just don't really talk about this. So
the other three views basically are all would be by definition post-tribulational, and post-millennialism wouldn't get into the rapture happening at the end. It's all at the end of the age. It's all the same thing.
I would say they don't even really use that language. Like the pre, mid, post language is an intramural debate amongst dispensational premillennialists, right? They just call it the second coming.
Because they view it as being the same event.
Yeah,
right. Yeah,
exactly. So inside of the dispensational view, you have three main positions, and there's a fourth. So I should say there's four positions. So the pre-trib position is that Christ comes before the tribulation, and the theology there is that believers shouldn't have to suffer the wrath of God. Jesus already suffered the wrath of God on the cross, and so the wrath of God that gets poured out on the tribulation should not be poured out on believers, and so they'll be rescued, they'll be caught up in the air. Harpazo, I think, is the Greek word in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Well, they will gather with Christ, and then basically hell on earth will be unleashed during this 7-year period of time. Antichrist, all kinds of plagues from Revelation, all that stuff will happen. That's the pre-trib view. It's based on like a second or third level inference from scriptures. It's never really clearly taught in any of those things. Like we see things like in Revelation, John says, I will save you from the hour of tribulation coming upon the earth. So pre-trib see that and they go, see, we're not even going to be here for this hour. Or, just like passages that describe, like I said earlier, describe the rapture seem a little different than the passages that describe the second coming. If I didn't understand the Greek dignitary cultural background, I could read that and go, yeah, this does seem a little different. Right. So they read them differently in that way.
Or even the idea, I think in the one you were referencing in Revelation, the idea of being saved from or you shielded from the wrath in the midst of when you're going through trials and tribulations.
Right.
Are two different
saved
readings
from
of that.
Or saved through, I think both are like legit translations.
Right.
So Bible
or
translations
the the reading of a specific reading of Daniel 9, the prophecy in Daniel 9, the 70 weeks.
Daniel 70 weeks, is this week like what's the purpose of the tribulation? Does it involve the church? Is it exclusively for Israel? So sometimes dispensationalists will say things like the purpose of the tribulation is to bring Israel back to Christ, to bring Israel to their knees. The church has already submitted to Christ, so they don't have to go through this. So that's an argument there. There's some marriage imagery that sometimes they appeal to, that the groom comes and snatches his bride away for a period of time prior to the reception, when everyone else celebrates their wedding together. And so they appeal to a Jewish wedding metaphor to say, see how Jesus is going to come. He's going to snatch his bride away. And then at a later time, we're going to have this reception, so to speak. We're going to have this millennial kingdom. So these are not, clear texts that teach the tribulation will be 7 years. And prior to that, there'll be a rapture. And after that, there'll be the second coming. They're more inferences that are deduced in that way.
And I think it's important to study it, to hold a position, but also hold positions loosely.
Yeah. This is not a top-tier issue that really Christians should divide over. We shouldn't be talking to each other in ways that are ungracious or looking down on others who maybe hold a different view. I really think this is an area where we can agree to disagree. There's enough that we have to stand for and contend for, that we can all just agree to say, Jesus is coming back. It's going to be a wonderful day. Hallelujah. We can celebrate our agreement together and just agree to disagree on these second-tier issues.
Yeah.
So
good. All right. Well, I think we've exhausted that. There is another question that came in that is, I think, somewhat relates to this, so maybe you can put that up there. This question was... You have it ready? There we go. So this was a question in relation with your sermon from yesterday. So we're going to pivot and have maybe a short conversation about your sermon from yesterday. If serving God will bring such opposition, why not stay comfortable, metaphorically cupbearer to the King? And that was related with some stuff from your sermon where you were talking about calling, and there was specifically an opposition phase in the midst of the calling. So I don't know. Do you want to take that?
Yeah, so I mean, during the sermon, we mentioned that when God calls you and you answer that call, it is very common to receive spiritual opposition towards following God. And that can feel very oppressive. That can be discouraging at times. But what I said was take it as a compliment. You serve in a long line of believers and disciples who have had to follow God through difficulties, whether that's the Old Testament or the New Testament, whether that's the prophets who were persecuted or Jesus himself. He said a servant's not greater than his master, or the apostles who all except for one, John, died a martyr's death. All of them were opposed. That's something that is just part and parcel of what it means to follow God in a fallen world, and we're in a spiritual war here. It's not peacetime, so let's just set our expectations rightly. But the question specifically says, why wouldn't I want to pursue that which is comfortable over and against that which might cause me to have some challenges, obstacles, opposition, and difficulties? At least that's the way I was reading the question. And for that, I would say because serving God is so much better than living in a comfortable life. Because giving my life for a cause, giving my life for the greater purpose of God, even if that means going through something difficult, is so much sweeter and so much satisfying. Even if it involves suffering, the reward at the end of my suffering of union with Christ is the greatest treasure I could ever ask for. So why would I ever choose the comforts of this world over the beauty and the glory of Christ? There's a passage at the end of the book of Hebrews, which is all about Christians not being comfortable and suffering, that says, let us go to him outside the camp and bear his reproach. And I love that little phrase, to him. We're going to go over there where Christ is, outside of what's comfortable, outside of our pleasantries, and bear his reproach. And he calls us out there, away from the citadel in Susa and our cupbearer responsibilities to the realm of the dangerous, the adventurous. The Lord of the Rings, when Gandalf comes to Bilbo and says, I'm looking for somebody to go on an adventure, but I can't really find anybody.
It's going to be dragons.
And Bilbo's like, well, of course you're not going to find anybody for an adventure around here in these parts. We're hobbits, we don't like adventures, nasty, terrible things. They make you late for dinner.
Yeah.
And
so are you saying that the person who asked this question is a hobbit?
Well, in fairness to whoever asked this question, we are all hobbits in this life. We all would resist.
Except for you. You're not a hobbit. You're a little too tall to be a hobbit. You'd be the wizard.
In my heart, I'm still a hobbit. We are all resistant towards going on these adventures, and God has to nudge me and push me towards the uncomfortable.
That very true. Very true. So I wonder if, and this might be somebody who, what do you think the purpose is of asking this question? I don't know who asked this question. So if they're asking the question to say, why do we do hard things? I think you're giving a good response to that. If God is calling you, and we've been talking about this a lot in Ezra and Nehemiah, sometimes God calls us to do hard things for him so that he gets the glory. If this is somebody the question could be read, is it necessary always to do something that's dangerous when in fact I may be able to make an impact where I am and have influence like Nehemiah was in the position that I'm in without necessarily rocking the boat? I'm gonna stay there. I'm gonna do the best I can with that job, and I'll make an influence that way. It depends on maybe what the purpose is of the question, why the question is being asked.
It's hard to know.
It is, but I think in our day and age, more and more God is calling us to do bold things and understand there may be consequences because, culturally speaking, things are turning against the Christian worldview.
Yeah. There's a quote I love by William Shedd, and he said, a ship in a harbor is safe, but that's not what ships were built for. Just going to drop the mic right there.
Just leave it right there. Okay. and there you go. All right, Dave, maybe here quickly at the end. So your sermon yesterday, you were talking about Nehemiah 2, and by the way, the whole idea of opposition is going to continue into our next section, specifically Nehemiah 4. They're building the wall with swords strapped to their sides, ready for combat. So they have swords in one hand and the trowel or the shovels in the other, building the wall. So we're going to get into that. The opposition is going to continue.
What a great metaphor for how we're supposed to live as followers of God, spiritually speaking. Is that the direction that you're going to take that?
I think so, and I think there's an importance of talking about building institutions that matter and impact the culture. Specifically speaking, I think the church, but also other nonprofits and things like that. That there will be opposition. I mean, I'm thinking right now, in terms of institutions, maybe things like the pregnancy centers that are fighting against things like abortion, and they're coming under a lot of fire in New Jersey specifically. So, like, there's a spiritual warfare aspect to that, but also you're trying to build up something that's going to ultimately have a positive impact on society.
So if I'm serving at a pregnancy center right now, especially in the Northeast in New Jersey where there might be litigation and legislation.
You may be, spiritually speaking, the spiritual wall that's building up the city of God here on earth, to use Augustine's language.
Right. And so this structure, this institution, is something that requires me to have both my sword and my trowel ready on a daily basis, because I need both of those tools in order to serve in that institution.
Right. Well, what is the purpose of building the wall around Jerusalem? Right. To protect God's city from attack, at least to some extent.
Yeah, it's a security issue.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people misunderstand the wall, and they think it is a message of exclusion. And that's not the message.
I'm not sure that's what he's getting at.
The message has to do with protection and security so that God's people can serve him and live in peace.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's a great application. I'm looking forward to what you're going to do with that passage. So in our day, we have to have swords and trowels too. So what's your sword? What's your trowel? How are you using both?
And interestingly, you get into Nehemiah 5, and then there's a lot of application for being generous and caring for the poor, and again, making a positive impact on society and those who are in need. So, yeah, there's going to be a lot of application, I think, in those chapters. But you had a calling ladder, so to speak. So I don't know if you could summarize that really quick. You didn't give the slide from this, right? So there was 4 phases of calling. Could you just summarize that really quick?
So, like,
and then
phase 1, when God calls you, was more the waiting phase. You're waiting. It's a phase where you know what can be. You're excited about your vision, but you know it's not right now. And between what should be and what can be can't really be until God says it should be. So that's the waiting phase. It can be a frustrating phase. Mm-hmm. It can really try our patience. It takes faith to go through the waiting phase and wait for God's timing and wait for God's open doors. Maybe you're in the waiting phase. I would say be patient. Phase 2 is the courageous phase. Mm-hmm. This is when the moment comes, your time comes, where you're going to now follow God in this calling, and you have the opportunity. And that phase can be scary. That phase can be anxiety producing. There's moments where you're going to have to be bold and speak up and ask for what you want. And Nehemiah is ready for that. He prays to the God of heaven and answers the king and asks for all of the supplies and provisions and protections that he needs for the trip. That's kind of the courageous phase. And then after he does all that work alone, we move into the team building phase. And this is when he rallies the troops and gathers others around him in order to come alongside of him in this vision, because you can't really accomplish a God-sized vision all by yourself. You're going to need a team. And Nehemiah builds a team, and they're excited about this work. And then comes that opposition phase. Once you've said yes to God and you've begun to make traction, the enemy is going to strike back, and he's going to begin to oppose your calling in that phase. And for that phase, we would say stand firm, continue to press on, and follow God's call.
Yeah. And you challenged us at the end to ask, what phase are you in?
Yeah.
Because we probably have all been through each of those phases.
Same question here today. If you're watching this podcast, what phase of that calling of God are you in now? If you're in the waiting phase, you got to be patient. If you're in the courageous phase, you got to be bold and take some steps of faith. If you're in the team building phase, then you got to reach out. You got to gather a team, and that's going to take some courage for you to maybe make a phone call or ask for help. And then if you're in the opposition phase, you got to stand firm, be prayed up, and just continue to follow what you know that God is calling you to do.
So that's the question. What phase are you in? What's my phase? That's another T-shirt. We come up with T-shirts every week.
What's my phase?
What's my phase?
Yeah. Very
All
good.
right.
So looking forward to our continued study in Nehemiah.
Sounds good. All right. Do you guys want to do a theology sprint here at the end, or have we covered enough theology so
I think
far?
we should do one. It's a weekly segment. It's only 60 seconds, right?
I thought we almost got out of it this time.
Almost.
Never.
Darn it.
So I'd like to return to the kids theology sprint. We have another one this week. that's cool with you guys, today's Theology Sprint.
Kids are wearing me out, man.
Are any kids watching this? I'm just wondering.
No, I think
We
it's
can
just
pass this on. Just pass it on to the
I think
kids.
the idea is that the kids ask good questions, whether they realize it or not.
Kids say the darndest things.
Don't they? Today's question is, how is Jesus God?
How is Jesus God?
You want me to take it or you want to take it?
You can go ahead and take it.
Yeah.
How you feel like you got a short answer to that one?
1 minute, right?
Other than just he is.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. So C.S. Lewis has a great quote in his book, Mere Christianity, about this question of who is Jesus. And what he says is that it's either one of three things. Either he's Lord, he's a liar, or he's a lunatic. So is he a liar because he's claiming the divine attributes of God? He's acting with the powers of God. He's receiving the worship of God. He's got the titles of God. He's referring to himself as I am, as Kyrios, as the Messiah. And he's saying things like, I and the Father are one. Before Abraham was, I am. Nobody could make those kind of statements and just be like mildly interesting, right? Those are controversial. So is he lying about those things? That's one option. Is he a lunatic? Did he say those kind of things? And that's the reason why is because he's a stark raving madman. And there have been people who claim to be the Messiah or claim to be God, and they're all, missing a few cards in the deck, so to speak. So is that possible? It's possible, but I would say if you think that Jesus is crazy, look at the rest of his teachings. Do those teachings seem like the ravings of a madman to you? They're the most beautiful teachings that anyone has ever taught on this planet. The parables, the golden rule. We still use these moral lessons 2,000 years later. So I don't think liar and I don't think lunatic are the right option. And the only third option, Lewis says, is he's the Lord, which means he really is who he claimed to be, which is the Lord, the God who has revealed himself both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, that he's one with God. And so what we have revealed in progressively in the scriptures is that God exists eternally in one essence, but he exists in three separate persons, that the Father is God, the Son is God, and the Spirit is God. They are three, yet they are one, and this is who we worship, the Trinity, God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit.
Good. There you go.
Minute?
Yeah, a minute-ish.
Yeah. All right.
I was thinking more about
what
like
direction
the,
would you go?
I was the way the question was asked. I was thinking more about like how to explain like the substance, like how can he be God and man at the same time?
Oh,
you know,
like
that type of thing.
hypostatic
Yeah,
union.
you were kind of giving more of a proof for how we should believe that he's God type of thing. But that's also good. It's also good.
Maybe next week.
Yeah, maybe next week. That's why I was pausing, trying to think how I'd answer that really
Yeah.
quickly.
Part 2 of that question next week.
Hypostasis.
Homeostasis. There you go. All right. Well, hey, this has been a long episode. Andy Stanley and the End Times kept us here longer, but hopefully you enjoyed that and that was beneficial. We hope to see you back next week on Behind the Pulpit. God bless.
Thanks, guys.